Well, hi everybody, and welcome to another edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're celebrating Sammy Hagar getting his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He's excited about it, and so should you be. Sammy is in many ways the hardest working man in rock and roll, and he has been since his youth. He really burst onto the scene as the lead vocalist in the band Montrose, which was frankly one of the best heavy rock bands of the 70s. Ronnie Montrose was a guitar genius. He was a virtuoso. And Hagar, of course, performed with other guitar virtuosos who we'll talk about soon later on. But he really burst on the scene being the vocalist with Ronnie Montrose, playing on the first two records of the original Montrose band. Hagar talks about how he rode Bad Motor Scooter on his way to meet Montrose at his house. They were both living in Northern California at the time, Hagar being a Bay Area native, a California boy, whether Baja or the other one in the United States. But those two Montrose albums became legendary. They sold well. They could have and should have sold even bigger, and they've become classics that are esteemed by rock fans even more in the decades since. Hagar eventually left the Montrose band because, as we all know, Ronnie Montrose, while a guitar genius with all his bands, whether Montrose, Gamma, the stuff he did with Tony Williams and Brian Auger, his great solo album Open Fire. He was a temperamental guy, and Hagar struck out on his own and recorded lots and lots of solo albums. He was putting them out once a year, sometimes twice a year. The guy was really hardworking. His first was 9 on a 10 scale, a lyric that would be referenced later on, a self-titled album, Musical Chairs, Street Machine, and Danger Zone. And these were all very good albums, but in terms of the production style, um, Hagar admits he was still sort of searching for a sound that was hard, a sound that sort of popped out of the speaker at the listener. And that's when you get an album that was truly his breakout album. And this was Standing Hampton from 1982. That was really the solo album that said, right, Sammy has always been here because he released quite a few albums before that, but now he's really here. And this was followed by an even bigger selling three lock box and an excellent album called VOA in 1984. That same year, he did a one off project that was very interesting with Journey's Neil Schon, also from the Bay Area, drummer Michael Shreve from the Bay Area of Santana fame. That's, of course, how he knows Neil Schon, and the great bass player Kenny Aronson, who's played with just about everyone. They did a great cover of the Procol Harum classic Whiter Shade of Pale on that album. They went on tour, but that was always going to be a one-off project. Journey were riding high, and Sammy was riding high on a solo career that was already really big, and it was about to go even bigger. And then something happened that turned Sammy from a household name and someone whose video icon Drive 55 was doing really well on MTV, as well it should, but things changed in an even bigger way. Eddie Van Halen and his brother Alex had fallen out with Van Halen lead singer David Lee Roth. David was out, he was off to do his own thing, Louis Prima style, and they needed a lead singer, and they couldn't find one. But as it happened, there was an Italian car mechanic in LA who worked on Ferraris and Lamborghinis and everything, and I think it was Eddie who had the Lambo and Sammy who had the Ferrari, and he put the two of them in touch. And that led to Sammy joining the band. And Van Halen had a kind of renaissance at that point. They never really slowed down. The final album with Roth was 1984, classic album. But they went from strength to strength because Sammy brought a new musicality to the band. Because not only was he a great vocalist, but he could also play guitar. And he played it really well. I mean, if you didn't have him in bands with virtuosos like Ronnie Montrose and Eddie Van Halen, he would be known as a damn good guitar player. But obviously, he's more known for his vocal and writing abilities because he's been in bands with Ronnie Montrose and Eddie Van Halen. But this allowed Eddie to play a lot of keyboards while Sammy played rhythm guitar. And because it was at this time where Eddie wanted to delve more and more into keyboard playing, and he was a damn good keyboard player. Something that Roth didn't like. Roth was saying, "You're a guitar god, stick to guitar." Eddie didn't listen, and Jump became a hit, but those two were always butting heads. And so Sammy joined, and the album 5150 was absolutely huge. This was followed by OU812, absolutely huge. They took a few years off and came back in style with FUCK for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And then a couple years later, in 1995, Balance. So between the mid 80s and mid 90s, the Van Hagar years produced four albums that really were all great, especially 5150 and OU812, which were really tight albums, not overly long, no filler. Those were great. But obviously, the FUCK album, also wonderful. You could make an argument that Right Now from that album and even Pound Cake were among the best of all the Van Halen songs. And it allowed Eddie, as I said, to sort of spread his wings and do more. But then business got in the way. But Sammy did have the lost love. So it was in the late 80s, early 90s that Sammy took a vacation to Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And he absolutely fell in love with the place. Wrote a song about it on the 1988 album. OU812, and he convinced the guys to invest in opening up a cantina and music venue in Cabo, which was a small little beach community at the time. And this was, of course, the Cabo Wabo Club. They were all happy with it, but then apparently Eddie got food poisoning down there. He wanted out. And so all the two brothers and Mike Anthony cashed out. Sammy was in. And Eddie didn't like him promoting the stuff at the show. He not only had the Cabo Wabo Club, but he had the Cabo Wabo brand tequila. Eddie hated it. So Hagar was banned from wearing the t shirt. So he got an arm tattoo. And then he was out of the band. But far from that being the end, Sammy did something that very few have done before in the world of rock. In the world of country music, Jimmy Buffett was able to turn his image and his lifestyle into a brand. And that is exactly what Sammy Hagar did post Van Halen. He said, I have a lifestyle that I want to share with people. I love the beach. I love a cold margarita. I love the laid back life. I'm going to sell this to my audiences and immerse them in it. And from the late 90s to the present day, that's what he's been doing. Now, the Cabo Wabo business that the Van Halen brothers scoffed at has turned out to be a multi million-dollar business. He sold the tequila brand for, I think it was 80 something million. He has Cabo Wabo clubs in places like Vegas now. He had them in other places as well. He's got Sammy's Beach Bar. He's got restaurant bars. He's got all sorts of fine dining, casual dining, music venues all throughout the US and Mexico. He's got a rum brand, Sammy's Beach Bum Rum. He's got a new brand of tequila out there. And so he continues to sell his lifestyle all the while working really hard, gigging in venues, big and small, his own venues, other people's venues, playing with different bands, whether it's The Circle, whether it's the Wabaritas, whether it's Chicken Neck, all bands that he fronts, but with musicians that are sometimes the same, sometimes different. There's always some cross pollination. Vic Johnson, for instance, is in both the Wabaritas and the Circle. Mike Anthony is in both Chicken Neck and the Circle. But he's someone that really loves to play. His voice is still great. He takes care of himself and he gives the fans what they want, which for a long time hasn't really been a thing in the wider Van Halen universe. And this summer, Michael Anthony, Jason Bonham, and Joe Satriani, a great guitar player, as we all know, are going on tour, and it's kind of sort of a Van Halen tribute because even though Sammy has always played Van Halen music in his solo outings since leaving the band. This is really kind of being billed as the closest thing we're going to get to an Eddie Van Halen tribute. He, of course, died in 2020, but there hasn't been a formal tribute because of, various personal, let's call them disputes, I suppose, between members of the band. But Sammy stands as a unique musician because he's a classic entertainer who gives the audience a good show. He doesn't half-ass it. He doesn't do it for the money because with the success of his drinks and entertainment businesses, he doesn't even need to do music. He does it because one, he clearly really, really enjoys it, and two, because he wants to give the audience one hell of a show. And he does that every single gig, whether in Cabo or at the Forum or anywhere else. And so I say, well deserved getting your star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. You're a true entertainer, Sammy Hagar. And isn't it great that Michael Anthony of Van Halen and Sammy have been friends for all these years? They keep the Van Halen flag flying, even after Eddie's sad death and Alex Van Halen, what amounts to a retirement because he hasn't touched a pair of drumsticks in public since the last Van Halen gig. But they're keeping that flag flying and also playing some other really great music. Congrats, Sammy, and congrats to everyone who's going to see him this summer. Like, subscribe. Everyone have a good time. Take care.